And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker. So the person, there's no pressure, Tim, the person who's going to actually launch our series of talks. The first one up is Tim Carey, and some of you may be aware of Tim's work, but Tim is Head of Communications and Facilities Management for the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage. In his role, he is in charge of the Custom House. Tim is also a best-selling historian, and his books include Mountjoy, The Story of a Prison, a fantastic book, I might add, Crow Park, A History, and Dublin since 1922. He is also a regular contributor to RTE Radio 1's Sunday Miscellany programme. And tonight, Tim is going to really set the scene, because we have to know about the building, we have to know about the importance of the Custom House. So Tim, I'm going to hand over to you, and Tim will talk about the history of the Custom House. Thanks very much, Tim.
Now, all right, Liz will tell me if I'm going anywhere wrong here in terms of how this is looking. So this is bizarre, I have to say, sitting in my back room talking to my screen. Anyway, you're very welcome. As Liz says, I suppose I'm currently a custodian of the Custom House, and I suppose it's in that context that I'm speaking this evening. I suppose one of my previous incarnations in my professional career was I actually managed Kilmainham Jail, so there was a definite direct connection between previous employment and where I am today. I want to thank Liz and Michal for really promoting the history of the Custom House over the last number of years, long before I came to the Custom House, and their enthusiasm, their dedication and their sheer energy in terms of celebrating what is one of the most important attacks to have taken place during the War of Independence. This is one of the things. The phone rings in the background. It'll stop in a sec. I also want to thank the Minister for supporting these talks. The Minister is particularly interested in the history of the Custom House, and his family has a lot of historical associations with Irish nationalism in the 20th century. Now it should stop. We were just saying how brilliant Zoom was. Hang on a sec. Apologies for that. See, I can't even hear you laughing. That's the best thing about this. And as Liz says, this is the start of a series of talks which goes right up to the anniversary. There's a number of other events taking place to mark the centenary, with History Ireland, with Beyond 22 project. And we also have, as the Minister referred to in the video, the opening of a major new visitor centre in the Custom House. Now, unfortunately, the COVID pandemic has put halt to the works. We were hoping to open that actually on May 25th, and that will celebrate not only the attack or mark the attack, but will celebrate the building. It'll be a major new visitor centre for the north side of the city, linking down to the Docklands and the IFSC area. So definitely look out for that later on in the year when it opens up. And when it opens up, it'll be run by the Office of Public Works as one of their heritage sites, like Kilmainham Jail, Dublin Castle, the Casino and Marino. I'd like to thank Sean Hogan, my colleague in the department, for all of his work in terms of the Custom House, and particularly his work and his engagement with the Relatives Group, who annually hold an event to mark the anniversary of the attack. The talk I'm giving this evening isn't about the attack. Actually, it's about everything else but the attack. And it's to set the context for, I suppose, the background to the attack, and I suppose the significance of the building, and the significance of the decision following the attack to actually rebuild the Custom House, because we could be in a position at this stage in the 21st century where there would be no Custom House in Dublin. And it's nearly unthinkable as a city not to have this architectural masterpiece. So a lot of people are aware of the attack. They have some appreciation of the knowledge of the Custom House. I am by no means the expert on the Custom House. I do have some knowledge, which I'm willing to share this evening. But I'm always acknowledging that there are architectural historians out there who know much more about the building than I do. However, I hope what I give this evening will just give an appreciation of the overview of the history of this remarkable building. Now, to start off any discussion about a building, you have to say, why was it built? It seems, sort of logical. Well, we need a customs building in Dublin. But this wasn't the first customs building in Dublin. The first customs building in Dublin was actually much further up the River Liffey at Essex, what was called Essex Bridge, and what would now be Capel Street Bridge. And if you can see the building on the left where my cursor is, that was the original custom house for Dublin. It was built in 1707, and it served its purposes reasonably well. But by the sort of the mid to late 18th century, it was physically in very poor condition. There were a number of problems with the physical nature of the building. It was deteriorating. But there were also, I think, other aspects in play which led people to conclude that the best way for the city to progress and for the customs to be properly managed was to move the custom house further down the River Liffey, down towards the mouth. Two people in particular were interested in this. This is a map actually, which shows you, if you can see where my cursor is, that's Essex Bridge. That was where the custom house was originally. This ground here became the ground where the custom house would eventually be constructed. So you can see ships would have had to travel a good way up the River Liffey, which was quite difficult, tidal, depending on the flow of the river, etc. So there was sort of ships, the ship's captains would have been keener for a move downstream, but one of the key aspects to the move downstream had nothing to do with anything of that. It actually had to do with property development. And there were one or two particularly powerful people in Dublin at the time who were very interested in moving the custom house further down the River Liffey in order to open up the lands in this area. And they were John Beresford and Luke Gardner, who owned significant property on the north side of the city. By having the custom house here, it was impossible to build a bridge further down across the River Liffey. So no ships would have been able to go up. So the key was to get the custom house further down to this area and then build bridges, including what is now O'Connell Bridge, across the River Liffey, and opening up all of this for property development and exploitation. And that was really the background to the construction of what we now know as James Gandon's custom house. The city, this is a kind of an interesting map. The city was very much to the west of where we would associate it with it today, the city centre. The city centre would have been in this area. Today, it's in this area. And a lot of this area would have actually been sloblands, intertidal areas, etc. And as you can see, the custom house, as it was built in the 1780s, would have been in the middle of the river at one point. So the quays were built, the whole development of the city was moving eastwards, and the custom house is a key part of that. By moving it down there, some more bridges could be constructed. And here we have on the left Beresford, and on the right Gardner, both of whom stood to gain substantially by moving the custom house. And in the middle we have the architect James Gandon. Gandon was born in London in 1742 of Huguenot extraction or heritage. His father went bankrupt actually when Gandon was quite young, and he was very conscious of the need to be earning money. He joined the architect William Chambers as an apprentice, and if you know the Casino and Marino in Dublin, William Chambers was the architect for the casino, and Gandon was an apprentice to him for 7 years. He was trying to basically establish himself in life, and he was involved in publishing and printing, in doing some architectural work, anything to raise money for himself. And in the 1770s, he became involved in, I suppose, a kind of a little Irish circle in London, with Lord Charlemont, members of the Wide Streets Commission, and Lord Carlow. And during these sort of parties and soirees and conversation afternoons, Gandon would have met Beresford. Beresford kept it quite secret what he was doing, and he actually asked Gandon to draw plans for the Custom House without telling anyone. The secrecy was because the people who had the property interests in the western part of the city were not happy about moving the Custom House to the eastern part of the city. So Beresford had to play his cards close to his chest. In December of 1780, he invited Gandon to draw plans for the Custom House, and Gandon abandoned his own plans to go to Russia to do some architectural work and moved to Dublin in April of 1781. And in August of 1781, the foundation stone for the Custom House was laid. And this was a huge time in Dublin in terms of its evolution. The Wide Streets Commission, the building of Sackville Street Bridge, now O'Connell Street Bridge, widening of Dame Street, the building of the quays, and then I think what many people would regard as the greatest building of that era, or possibly any era in the city, and certainly it is one of the greatest buildings, was the Custom House. Now the Custom House originally was going to look like this, which would have been quite different because it lacked a dome. And Gandon's original plan didn't have a dome, and the dome, the dome was very much a statement piece. It was for ships coming in from the Irish Sea through Dublin Bay, and they would see the landmark of the Custom House, and that was their their target. That was their arrival point. It was their destination. You had now arrived in Dublin City. Gandon's building is interesting for many reasons, but one that really struck me was that the four sides are completely different. It's a very unusual building from my experience, that the Liffey side is very different from what you see at the bottom, the Liffey side, and then is very different from the side facing the IFSC, which is here, and very different from the north side, which is facing sort of Bossaris and Beresford Place. And yet the whole thing works very well as a single building. A lot of that is, it's a subtle design, but a lot of it is to do with the four corners. The four corners kind of unify the building externally. Internally, they're kind of a little bit different if you're familiar with the building, but externally they hold the whole building together. What set the Custom House apart from its brilliant architecture was its setting. It was the first purpose-built sort of statement building in the city that you could walk the whole way around. It was to be seen from all angles. And that hadn't been done before. So this was really, something that was, I suppose, quite extraordinary for the city, and quite remarkable, statement of where the city was going. As this was one of the second city of the empire at the time in the late 18th century. It was one of the most wealthy cities of Europe. It was one of the most populous cities of Europe, and the Custom House was a statement of that. And it was built at a time of, I suppose, sort of an Irish nationalism that we might not fully recognize today, but certainly a nationalism of the time with Grattan's Parliament. And the building was a sort of a statement of Irish intent to be an international city and to deal with the world on an equal footing internationally. And some of the symbolism around the Custom House, you can see in the top left here, the sort of the Irish coat of arms. You have the statues of, not on this side, but on the far side, you have the statue up here, you have the statues of the continents of the world. This was Ireland linking to the rest of the world, and the Custom House was that statement. One of the most important places, or really actually the most important place within the building, was the Custom Hall, or the Long Hall. The Long Room. The Long Hall was a good pub. The Long Room was the Custom Hall of the Custom House. It's where the ship's captains would have gone in and carried out their business. It's where, you know, the commerce of the Custom House took place. And you can see it kind of, it was up on the first floor here. It was with the columns. So the ship's captains would have come in, and the pursers and whoever else was dealing with the cargo would have come in off the steps in here and up into the Long Room. So that was the heart of the Custom House. I mean, you can see it here. You can see the sort of the entrance to it here, and you can see the plan of it here with the columns. And then there was a balcony area as well, and you can see the steps in from the River Liffey. It was the key part of the Custom House. The whole reason for the being of the Custom House was what was being transacted within that room. In terms of nationalism, there's a lot of kind of symbolism around the Custom House. At the top of the columns, you can see here, you can see the English rose with the Irish harp, and I suppose the union and the unity between the two. And actually, I had the privilege very recently of, while there was work being carried on by the Office of Public Works to clean the pediment above the entrance on the Liffey side, to go up and have a look at the sculptures up there. And you can see here, you can see Britannia here and Ireland here, two female figures who look like they've just come back from a very good night out and have their arms around each other and are the best of buddies. And this is I suppose the symbolism of that was, you know, Ireland, maybe you have its own parliament, but it's still in friendship with across the water. And there's also a statue of Neptune up in that pediment. And this whole, you know, the sea and Ireland and Britain and the friendship would dispel death and misery and despair, which is symbolized by, well, one of these sculptures down in the bottom part here, which is looking fairly in the last throes of death. On the right-hand side here, you can see a bull or a cattle, and that was symbolizing that, you know, the trade that was coming from Ireland to the rest of the world. And this is not quite a unique symbol in the Custom House, but very much a predominant symbol in and around the building. You can actually, you can see a number of them around the building. My favorite pieces of work in the Custom House are the riverine heads. People call them the river gods. I don't really think they were river gods. Personally, I think they're riverine heads. They're symbols of the rivers of Ireland, the main rivers of Ireland, as well as the Atlantic Ocean. They're made of Portland stone, 2 feet 3 inches by 10 inches, and sculpted by a Dubliner called Edward Smith. And I've just chosen a few of them, which you can see if you're walking along the River Liffey at the front of the Custom House. These they're really amazing things when you get into them, and if you learn about them and learn the symbolism of each of them, they're fascinating. And you know, you might be familiar with them, but just when you look at them and you read the articles, this is the River Erne. So you have a kind of a sullen face, and there's a variety of fishes you can see up on the top of his head. You can see a scallop here. You can see an eel wriggling from its closed mouth. And then the beard and the mustache are made out of, or sort of fashioned in the likeness of river weeds. This is the River Foyle. And you can see 1689, the Siege of Derry. and the symbolism there. And on the top, you can see the castles, three castles, or sorry, two castles, and then you can see the prow of a ship. It's not a great photograph, but you can see a prow of the ship breaking through chains, which is symbolic of the lifting or the breaking of the siege of Derry in 1689. And then there would be laurel leaves representing victory. This one is pretty much definitely the Barrow, a very sullen, kind of ill-humored expression on his face. And you can see kind of loads of little fishes coming out of his mouth. You can see the eye there. And he's crowned by leaves of laurel again. And then you can see the sheep, a sheep, which is, there was, at the time, there was lots of sheep walks along the River Barrow. And that's symbolic of that. And then you can see the River Boyne. Now you can just see 1690 here, just on the forehead. So obviously commemorating the Battle of the Boyne. Fine face with a kind of a sad expression. Laurel leaves for the victory at the Battle of the Boyne, and sheaves of wheat, symbolic of the produce around Boyne, the River Boyne at the time. So these are all around the building. Now these riverine heads are not kind of unique to the Custom House, although many people think, you know, it's the only place that this type of thing features. Somerset House in London, which would have been very, I suppose, influential in the design of the Custom House for Gandon, also had riverine heads. But I think everyone agrees that the ones at the Custom House are uniquely good examples and are the finest examples of this type of sculpture that was actually carried out at the time. So, you know, when you're walking past the Custom House, have a look up. They really are, they're quite special actually. Internally, the Custom House is basically kind of three rectangles. The west side, the central, and the east side. The Custom Hall, this is the ground floor, and all the plans I show you will be on the ground floor just for the sake of continuity. This is sort of the level below the Custom Hall. So the Custom Hall would have been this shape, but above this. And you can see the sort of various offices, etc. And I suppose the different layouts for each side, which would have reflected sort of the external differences between the four sides. This is the River Liffey and the walk in there. And this is the side facing Busaris and Beresford Place. And it's interesting, like, you know, what's the front door to the Custom House? And it's not really something that's been fully, I think, concluded. A lot of people will say that this is the front door to the Custom House, but I don't buy it, to be honest. If you ask anyone where's the front door to the Custom House who doesn't, I suppose, work in the Custom House or maybe studied architecture, they would almost always say the entrance at the River Liffey. And if you look at any painting from the 19th century after the Custom House was opened, this is a Malton print, might be a little bit earlier than 1800. Every single one of them that you can find in any gallery and any museum shows this side of the Custom House. Now, I don't know why they would show the back door of the Custom House if this was the back door. And this is the steps into the Custom Hall, and this is the step into that whole commerce area and the reason for the Custom Hall being constructed. So I definitely think, for me, this is the main door of the Custom House. And I'm just going to show some. It was by far, I think, the most painted building in Dublin in the 19th century. I'm just going to show a few of them here to you now. This is looking at it from, this is what is now O'Connell Bridge. So you can see ships no longer being able to get further up the River Liffey. And this was the key to unlocking sort of D'Lear Street, Westmoreland Street, and then up into what became Sackville Street and now O'Connell Street. And then you have Mountjoy Square, and you have all that property being developed as a result of the moving of the Custom House down the river. And this is looking back up in a later stage. And you get a sense of just how busy this place was. You can see the Custom House dock here on the right-hand side. This would have been part of the Custom House property when it was constructed. It was about in the 1830s, late 1820s, that the property which was attached to the Custom House became part of what would eventually become Dublin Port. This is from 1813, this illustration. And again, you can see all the busyness and activity outside on Custom House Quay. And here again, actually the fair bit of activity on the north side of the river, the south side of the river as well. And actually the original main docks would have been on the south side before the new docks, George's Dock and Custom House Dock, were constructed. And this gives you, I suppose, a bit better at the geography than I'm describing. So we have the Custom House here. Beresford Place, named after Beresford, who was so influential. And you have Gardner Street, Luke Gardner. So you can see the property interests coming into play here in a big way. You can see ferry crossings here, no bridges, so ferry crossings here. The old dock here, and these were the Custom House stores. So as you can see, there was a direct connection over to the Custom House stores. And this is where Store Street Garda Station is now, named after the Custom House stores. And this is where Busaras is. The old dock was later filled in. I think you'll see that later on. And then as part of this, you had a George's Dock and the inner dock to provide more, I thought this was berthage, and then massive warehouses for tobacco and tea and sugar, and all of which would have then been paid for in the Custom House itself. And this is another map from around sort of the 1830s. And you can see there's the Customs Office. And actually, interestingly, by this stage, the Custom House was no longer just the Custom House. It was actually the Stamp Office, the Poor Law Office, and the Board of Works Office, the Office of Public Works, would have been I suppose, headquartered there by the 1830s. So what was built as purely a custom house to deal with trade was now merging or morphing into a building of wider government significance. And I suppose it's not fully appreciated, but the Custom House was actually the second most important government department building in the city after Dublin Castle. And it was really sort of the administrative heart of government in the city in the 19th century. I suppose a lot of that has kind of shifted now around Kildare Street after independence, but this would have been, you know, the key government building in Dublin right up until independence. I think this is one of the earliest photographs for the Custom House, of the Custom House. I think it's from the late 1840s, 1848, I think is the date. Someone, you can see all the chimneys, so all the offices and etc. would have had their own fireplaces. And a quick way of figuring out was is a photograph before or after the fire. The ones before the fire have a lot of chimneys, and the ones after the fire don't. And it's a very quick reckoner for that. So this is looking from around by sort of the south side of the river down towards O'Connell Bridge. And again, you can see just how busy it was. And like, this was a fully functioning custom building, lots of activity along the quays, lots of traffic, lots of money going into the Custom House. Lots of deals being done. There were ads put into the paper. If a ship came in from wherever, South Africa, it'd dock, and we'll put a notice in the paper saying, you know, it's going back to South Africa. Does anyone have anything that they want sent there? And, you know, to meet at the Custom House and to do the business there. As the years went on, there weren't that many changes internally during the 19th century up until this point. So you were talking about, this is about the 1840s. So you would have had other government departments coming in, but not a huge amount of change. you can see here, this is where things start to change externally to the Custom House. This was the swivel bridge, which is Butt Bridge today. This was originally built in 1879. And again, so, you know, no ships could go beyond this point after that, except the lower ones. And I presume this is one of the Guinness barges. And you can see the eastern elevation of the Custom House here. And then just I suppose to underline the point that there was very little internal changes. I mean, the one on the left is the original plan of the Custom House, and the one on the right is from the 1840s. Very little internal changes. That will not always be the case. And you'll see that in the next set of drawings we do. Now, I think the biggest disaster for the Custom House and the most significant thing to happen to the Custom House in the 19th century was the construction of the Loop Line railway bridge, which you can see here, connecting what is now Tara Street with Connolly Station. There were kind of few alternatives. There was an in-out, the line of this, although there was some talk it could have gone on this side, but really it would have been very difficult to go anywhere but I think on this side. And in doing that, it has cut off the Custom House from the rest of the city in a way that I don't think it's ever really recovered from. The Custom House was really part of the heart of the city, and with the construction of the Loop Line Bridge, there was a physical, but also a visual and I think psychological division between one side of the Custom House and the other side of the Custom House. This is just after the Loop Line Bridge was constructed. And you can see here, I mean, it's completely obliterated any kind of real meaningful visual connection between what had become the city centre around O'Connell Bridge and the Custom House. If you look back up the other way, you know, again, the barrier is there. This building had then become quite isolated, or began to become quite isolated from the rest of the city. And I think that isolation is possibly only really beginning to change in the last few years with the development of the IFSC and the whole Docklands area. On the eve of the attack in 1921, this is a ground plan from 1919. You can see blue is Inland Revenue, the yellow is Stationery Office, the green is Custom and Excise, and the orange is the Local Government Board. And the Local Government Board had become, I suppose, the most important arrival in the Custom House. And that was, I think, in 1879 or thereabouts. And it was a significant government department to move in. It's still the headquarters today of local government in Ireland. And that continuity for nearly 1.5 centuries is a very important part of the history of the building. But you can see here, even just on a quick look, there's all these things in the courtyard. They're starting to build buildings within the courtyards and just sort of adding on bits, making more room, connecting areas that hadn't been connected. And if you see here the difference between the 1840s and 1919, you can see all these walls have been demolished. There's significant changes in this area. All of these partition walls have been demolished, and various changes have taken place. So it had become very intensively used, which you can see here. And it became, by sort of, you know, the turn of the 20th century, as the Border Works, the Poor Law Board, the Marine Board, the Stationery Office, the Estate Duty Office, the Civil Service Commissioners, the Revenue Commissioners, and the Local Government Board were all being housed in the Custom House. And, you know, that centre of British administration in Ireland was a key reason. I suppose there were 3 key reasons. One was a centre of British administration. I mean, this was where a huge amount of the British administration did their business. The records of the Local Government Board were kept here. Attacking them, destroying them, would have paralysed local government in Ireland. And then the symbolism, I think, of the Custom House as being, you know, I suppose the symbol of the city. And those 3 aspects, I think, were key to sort of the background to the IRA deciding during the War of Independence that the custom house would become a target for attack. Now, I'm not going to go into the attack because you're going to hear lots about that from Liz and Michal and others over the next while. And I will absolutely leave it to them. So I'm going to skip over that and go to after the attack. So this is the custom house after the attack, gutted by fire. You can see the dome is pretty much destroyed. You can just see the Statue of Commerce still standing pretty precariously, I'd say. You can see kind of straight through some of the areas of the custom house. And then I have some photographs from the Irish Architectural Archive and from Kieran O'Connor, the state architect, and the Office of Public Works. This was the custom hall. And when you talk about a building being destroyed, it's hard to see how a building could be more destroyed nearly than this. So this was the heart of the building. This was the custom hall that was destroyed. Another just a general room on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side is the dome. And I'm just showing those. There's actually a whole series of photographs of these, of the custom house after the fire and after the attack. And you know, it was destroyed in a way that, you know, I think anyone who wanted to destroy a building would have been proud of. The temperature of the fire averaged, they reckon, around 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit. But they say in parts of the custom house, which burnt for a week and didn't cool off for a number of weeks, was up to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. You know, just extraordinary level of damage was done. Now, following this, the Office of Public Works, you can see the date here, 29th of May. The custom house was under military guard, and this was one of the few people to get in there, a man from the Office of Public Works, Challoner Smith, interesting first name. He was basically in charge of the salvage operation to try and see what could be rescued from the custom house, and to do an initial assessment. One of the main things to be done was make sure that the safes were all opened and whatever goodies were in the safes were gotten out. There was £200,000 worth of excise material in one of the safes, which was rescued. Other safes which were in very damaged areas, the inside, the material had been destroyed because of the heat. Another thing that needed to be rescued was the hallmark stamps, because the hallmark stamps for all the silver and gold was marked by a stamp from the custom house. So one of the key thing was after the fire was to get hold of that, because if that all gold and silver business had stopped as a result of the fire. Just as one quote about the fire, the damage caused to the entire building is so widespread, so deep-seated and so serious as to dispel all hope of being able to save and restore this very familiar and very beautiful structure. And that was one of the key questions at the time. It was so badly destroyed. The Office of Public Works felt that it wasn't worth saving. Now, there was a lot of debate, even in 1921, before independence, as to will we rebuild this custom house or will we not? Estimates were gotten, and the most sort of common estimate put reconstruction at what would have been at the time a huge sum of £1.1 million. But some of the architects saying it's not even worth it. Let's just knock it down and start again. There's no point in dealing with this. The damage is so severe. The building is so unstable that, you know, it's not practical to restore this building. And it's interesting, that decision, this is one of the bills of estimates. So it was sort of the building works for £750,000, heating 33,000, lighting 15,000, and then the various other costs. And then of course, the usual 10% for contingencies and architects and surveyors fees, which are always important in architectural works. which brought it up to about 1.2 million. Now, partly as a result of the destruction, but I suppose in other reasons that were there at the time, the future of the Custom House was up for debate. This is a drawing from 1914 from the civic plan by Abercrombie from 1914. And it shows a kind of reworked Custom House with a new bridge centered on the center of the Custom House, which actually would be amazing when you think about it, and that it would sort of set the building off perfectly within the city. That was the plan. It never sort of materialized. Other proposals came through that the Custom House should actually become the General Post Office, and that the General Post Office should become the headquarters for Dublin Corporation. And that was very strongly put forward by the Greater Dublin Reconstruction Committee. The logic was that being near the ships, etc., the mail could be quickly brought in and the mail could be quickly sent out for distribution throughout the world. It kind of overlooked the fact that it was a little bit off the beaten track at that stage, and to use the General Post Office, you know, it would have been awkward for people. Another plan which was put forward by the Railway Commission was to demolish the Custom House and build the National Railway Terminal there. And there was another plan which was to demolish the Custom House and make it a public park. Now, it wasn't really until 1925, so 3 years after independence, that T.J. Byrne from the Office of Public Works convinced the government that the Custom House needed to be restored, along with the GPO and the forecourts. The Custom House was the one that was, I think, most in doubt, because I suppose its scale and the level of destruction. But Byrne, to his eternal credit, argued that he could actually restore it for cheaper than what was being quoted beforehand, and that it needed to be restored, and that Dublin would be the poorer without it. So it cost Byrne roughly around, I think, around £300,000. So instead of 1.1 million, it was £300,000. Mainly, he reused 230,000 of the bricks that were in the original Custom House. So nothing was spared, and you know, as well as being, I suppose, architecturally a good thing to do, it was certainly a much more economic way of doing it. He also used a lot of direct labor. Many of the people who worked on the Custom House would have been ex-National Army, and this was a good way of providing, I think, a public employment for them. So this is in the later stages of the reconstruction. You can see the scaffolding going up for the dome, and the dome was only completed in 1930. Now, I think Byrne has come under a lot of criticism from architects since then, because instead of rebuilding it in Portland stone, he rebuilt it in Ardbracken limestone from Meath, which gave it a different texture to the rest of the building, and also a different color. And the color, I suppose the contrast in color is becoming more and more marked over the years, which is unfortunate. Now, I'm going to show you, these are the first internal photographs of the Custom House. The Custom House was a place of work, and people don't generally take photographs of places of work. And the pre-21 Custom House, I certainly haven't been able to come across, and I don't know of anyone else who's been able to come across photographs showing the interior of the Custom House. I'm sure some exist, but they're not in any of the archives, and they're not in any of the collections. So the first real photographs that we see internally are after T.J. Byrne's restoration of the Custom House. One of the key decisions, another key decision to save money was he didn't rebuild the original Custom Hall. And he built a new one, which was on the the east side of the city. So if you're over at the IFSC and you're looking across, you can see a low building in the middle, in the middle of that wing, and that is the Custom Hall that T.J. Byrne built to take the place of the original long room. You can see here on the bottom left, one of the very nice, they're not all, take my word for it, they're not all this nice. These are one, I think there's about 7 or 8 of these in the Custom House, and these would have been for the very senior officials. And then these are the typical corridors that are in the north elevation. particularly on the ground floor and the first floor with wood paneling. And then this is a detail which I really quite like, and there's still a number of them in the Custom House. All the original ones are still there. It's the messenger's hut. So there would be young messengers would be sitting here, and they would be summoned to an office to bring a piece of paper to someone else in the building or to the general registry. And it was needed because there's the corridors of the Custom House. If you add up all the length of the corridors, it's 1.5 kilometers of corridors, a big building. And so you have these little messenger huts around the building. The original custom hall, the long room, would have been here. And this is sort of part of the, I suppose, the tragedy of the rebuild was that there wasn't sufficient funds to do a rebuild of the central area, and then this became just kind of a void space. It's a glass roof over the boiler. So what had been, and you can see the original outline of the rooms there, what had been the heart of the Custom House became a kind of a useless space. And what you can see here probably automatically is that the new civil service in Ireland really loved their individual offices. So you went from was more and more open plan to a lot of series of individual offices all around the Custom House. And it's still pretty much in that way. You can see the difference here. This had become kind of higgledy-piggledy, and a lot of walls being broken through. And here it's very uniform, and you know, if anyone who is in the Custom House and has to go for a meeting is down corridors, you can find yourself just walking down corridor after corridor with doors closed, and it all dates back to T.J. Burns. I think it probably suited the civil service at the time. I'm not so sure it suits it now in terms of open plan and collegiate and project rooms and all of that. I mean, it's nearly the design there is nearly sort of a design against communication in any shape or form. And so it's quite a strange place sometimes when you're in it and going down these corridors. So the reconstruction of the Custom House, one of the first things they did in celebrating that was to put it on the money. Which was an amazing thing. So the first print run of Irish pound notes featured on I think it's the obverse side, the Riverine heads, or many of the Riverine heads. And what you have here is, so the top left, the top left is the Boyne, but interestingly, you can't see the date of 1690. So I think I don't think it's there. So I thought it was just inappropriate to mention the Battle of the Boyne in the new Irish currency. But it is interesting that it's not visible. And the bottom left, you have the Shannon with the trident. The top right is the River Lee, which was the sort of the second major, Cork was the second major port in the country. And then you have the Ban here on the bottom right with a turban made of linen. And you can see sort of the hops as part of it as well. So again, you know, the Custom House became what had been a symbol of sort of Irish nationalism in the 18th century, then a symbol of a British administration, became once again a sort of symbol of Irish nationalism after independence and after its reconstruction. This is a photo taken by Fáilte Ireland and I'd say, I'm wondering if it was probably during the Eucharistic Congress, but I'm not entirely sure. There was a lot of buildings lit up during the Eucharistic Congress and a lot of photographs taken of them. This is a photograph I absolutely love of the Custom House because it shows, so this is where the old dock was. That had been filled in by that stage. This is Store Street. These are the Custom House stores. And you can see a direct physical link. No road going around the Custom House, a direct physical link to the stores. And then you can see just along here, there's sort of bollards, because this was actually a public thoroughfare, a public park. So all the grounds of the Custom House were open. And you can see the people walking along the footpaths there. And it was very much integrated with the surrounding part of the city. And I think it's just, I suppose when you look at the grounds of the Custom House, you don't really appreciate how significant they are or the size of them. But they're probably the second largest area of green space in a kind of a park type setting on the north side of the city, except for Mountjoy Square. And I think it's always been it's a pity that the railings are there that cuts that off. So over the years, you had the Loop Line Bridge, and then you had kind of traffic generally around the Custom House. And then you had the railings, which were put up in the 1940s or late 1940s, early 1950s. Now, I just as a precursor to someone else, there are some literary associations with the Custom House. The one on the left is, you can see the plaque, and it marks or commemorates the location of chapter 16 of Ulysses, which is in the cabman shelter. It comes after the scene in Monto with Leopold Bloom and Stephen Dedalus, and they leave Monto after sort of a very strange hour or two, and walk through the grounds of the Custom House, along the footpaths and out here, and then they come to the cabman shelter. And chapter 16 is cabman shelter. It's where Skin the Goat is working. Skin the Goat from the Phoenix, the Invincibles. Now this is a later photograph, and there is a bit of debate that the original cabman shelter would have been here, but the photograph I'm showing you shows it here, but it gives you a very good idea of what it would have been like. And then the poster on the right, obviously, is The Quiet Man, and that was written by a member of staff who worked in the Customs and Excise unit of the section of the Custom House, Maurice Walsh. And I don't know whether he wrote it on work time or not, but he was a very successful author in his day, and he wrote The Quiet Man as a short story in a collection of short story, I think called The Green Rushes, and he sold The Quiet Man story to an American publisher for £2,000 in February of 1933, which is a princely sum. And I think it was a significant reason why he then retired from the Customs and Excise office in later on that year at the age of 54 to write full time. But of course, I think the most famous author associated with the Custom House is Flann O'Brien, Brian O'Nolan, Miles Nagopoline, and many other probably pseudonyms. Flann O'Brien started, or Brian O'Nolan started in the Custom House in 1935 as a civil servant. He was very conscious of the need to earn money because he was the eldest of a number of children, and there was no one else who was bringing much money into the house. He was 23 years old when he started, and he started in the Department of Local Government under John Garvin, who was an assistant principal at the time. Now, by all accounts, O'Brien was a very good civil service when he started there. And he was so good, in fact, that he became private secretary to three ministers, Sean T. O'Callaghan, Paddy Rutledge, and Sean McEntee. Very, that's not the sort of position that they would have put anyone into at the time. And to put Flann O'Brien in there from a very young age was a very sort of, testimony to his ability and his judgment. He carried out his duties with distinction. He was very unobtrusive. He wasn't really sort of, one of the sort of more flamboyant of the writers in the city at the time, and wouldn't really hung around that much with the sort of the avant-garde writers. But he did start writing a column for the Irish Times, initially in Irish and then in English after 1943, Cruiskin Lawn. I'd say a fair bit of it was done from his office in the Custom House, or his other office, or what he used to call the office, which was the Scotch House, which was a pub on the opposite side of the River Liffey. And it's really when that became sort of 1943 that things started to turn a little bit sour for Flann O'Brien. Actually, there's a couple of interesting things here. You can see his satchel that he used to bring to work And you can see his wallet here, and he had 3 business cards. One was Miles Nagopling, the writer. One was Lord Nolan of Santry, and one was Brian O'Neill, civil servant. And I'm not too sure which one of those he prized most, possibly the day job one. But in 1943, Flann O'Neill was made secretary to the Tribunal of Inquiry into this fire at St. Joseph's Orphanage in Cavan, which in this fire killed, I think it was 35 girls. It was an industrial school being run by nuns, and fire broke out. And allegedly, the nuns locked the children into their dormitory when the firemen arrived, because they didn't want the firemen seeing the girls in their undergarments. And 35 girls died in that fire. It's possible that this had a sort of significant effect on Flann O'Brien, and it does mark the time when he sort of started going to the pub a bit too often. It also marked he was moved to the road section, which was much less interesting and much less sort of cut and thrust than the minister's office. And after that, he was made principal officer of town planning for the department. So it was a very significant responsibility, but I don't think it was a responsibility that he really valued. He would have seen other roles in the department, particularly in the minister's office, etc., as being much more important. And I think, according to sort of the people who've researched it, O'Brien became bored at that stage, and it's then that the Scotch House became. He used to come in, do an hour's work, leave his coat and hat on the rack, so his secretary could say, "Oh, he must be he's in the Custom House somewhere. He's out doing business." And then he'd spend the rest of his day in the Scotch House doing his writing and whatever else. Eventually, in 1953, things came to a head because Flann O'Brien was clearly a well-established alcoholic at that stage. And, you know, he was showing up at local government board meetings drunk. He was incapable really of continuing on. There was an argument about whether they wanted him to retire, and he said, "Fire me." And of course, you know, firing someone from the civil service is a very difficult thing to do. So Flann O'Brien, they came to some sort of reasonable agreement, and he was given a pension, and he left the Custom House in 1953, or actually early in 1954. And if you want to see the state of Flann O'Brien at that stage, there's video footage of him on the first Bloomsday in 1954, and he's clearly, by the time, you know, they've just arrived nearly in Sandycove, and certainly by the time to get to Monkstown, Flann O'Brien is very much worse for wear. But still one of the most significant figures, I think, on a personal level, to have worked in the Custom House. In the 1950s, things started to change around the Custom House. Bossaris was constructed in 1953, and you had Memorial Road. So the Custom House the surrounding of the Custom House was completely changed. So what you're looking at here, where Bossaris is where the stores were for the Custom House. And you can see from the aerial photograph here, this is just after it was constructed. Here, and you have the full circuit. So now it's surrounded by traffic, it has the bridge, and the railings have actually gone up, I think, at this stage. And the Custom House, I think, you know, had become very cut off from the rest of the city at that point. In 1956, this is the memorial to the Custom House attack, Jan Goulet, the Breton sculpture. Provided this, and it was paid for, I think, from subscriptions through sort of those who took part in the attack, public subscriptions. And you can see, again, the cows just up here, the bulls and the cattle, again, symbolizing what was the main trade of the Custom House. But by this stage, revenue had very much declined in the internal part of the Custom House. This was another example of the Custom House getting cut off from the rest of the city. Official cars only, so there was security or a service officer at the gate, stopping others coming in. And this was where, again, sort of, you know, it's nearly sort of the bastion of administration in the 50s, cutting itself off from its hinterland. And the Custom House really continued on without too much change until well, 1979 particularly, but in the 1980s, in 1979, stone fell from the cornicing, and had someone been walking underneath the stone, they would have been severely injured. Investigations were carried out, and it was found that a number of areas of stone were failing, and there was a very serious situation. There was a lot of corrosion from pollution, and a lot of corrosion from the sea air. So a major restoration project, major for the time, when, you know, in the 1980s, when there really wasn't much money around, and £5 million was spent on the restoration of the Custom House in advance of the 200th anniversary of the construction of the Custom House, which would have been in 1991. And you can see the IFC building being constructed there, which, you know, this whole area now down by the Docklands is completely transformed. And I think it's, once again, it's brought the Custom House back to a central position in the city that I think it had lost for many years. Just showing you a few of the internal spaces today. These corridors, again, you know, you can go after corridor and see very similar scenes back to T.J. Byrne time from the 1920s. Now these look sort of reasonable corridors. You know, the offices, it's a bit hit and miss whether they're in any way decent. There's you know, the last major works to take place in the Custom House were in the 1980s. That's, you know, more than 30 years ago. And for a building of its type and of its age and of its use, it really hasn't had anything invested in them since then. And to be honest, it shows in many areas. While these areas look reasonable, I also say, look on the one on the left, and, you know, so there's a bit of a lottery if you're in the Custom House as to where you're located and what your environment is like. This is the main room of the Custom House, which is actually quite small. This is the conference room. It seats roughly 60. So this is the largest room in the Custom House. And it's quite a narrow footprint of a building, you know, even though it looks huge from outside, actually the building with depth is very narrow. This is a view from one of the offices, and the Custom House remains one of the most sort of photographed buildings in the city. The amount of times you look out on the quays and there was someone taking a photograph of the Custom House. And, you know, for visitors who are kind of going down to the IFSC and all that area, and really to draw people down, it's still a major landmark for the city. And you know, I think it needs to be recognized as such. And I think one of the ways that it has been recognized is really since its restoration the restoration works in 1980s and up until 1991, the Custom House then became seen as a backdrop to, you know, spectacular events in the city. This is a bit of a blurry still from the Guinness ad, the Guinness Christmas ad, which starts off outside the Custom House. This is the fireworks display from, I'm pretty sure that's from St. Patrick's Festival from 1995, which was the largest fireworks display in Europe that year. You could tell that Celtic Tiger was literally around the corner if we're doing the largest fireworks displays in Europe. But the Custom House, again, it became this sort of set piece for the city. And has been used, and the department is delighted that it is used for that purpose. You have the Christmas lights, and you have the New Year's Eve concert and fireworks displays and river events that are now taking place each year and run by Fáilte Ireland. And, you know, with all this, we will be working with the OPW just to facilitate these events. And we do recognise that the building plays a much wider role in the city than just to house 400 civil servants. It has a very significant place in the city and in the heart of the city. And that's something that I think that the department is always very conscious of. And I think that could be my last slide. Nope. And that ended on that. And just to flag that this area, this central area, has been given over by the department and is now being worked on by the Office of Public Works, and that is going to be the visitor centre. There was a visitor centre. This is a significantly upgraded visitor centre dealing with the whole history of the Custom House, with a special area dealing with the attack. So as I say, hopefully, well, that will be open later on in the year. It was hoped to be for May 25th, but it's probably realistically looking late summer at this stage, or early autumn. But I would advise you to look out for that, and definitely make a point of coming in and having a look and learning more about the history of the Custom House than I was able to tell you this evening. Now, will I stop sharing here, Liz? Grand.
That's it, Tim. Yeah, and I'd just like to say huge thanks, Tim, for that really informative talk, and the pictures were absolutely amazing. Just you're free to take some questions, Tim. Yeah.
Yeah, as long as I know the answer.
A little easy on you. But lots of great comments coming in, and people are tuning in from across the world, which is great, from Florida and Netherlands and so on. So thanks a million, everyone. And also comments on your talk. Brilliant talk, Tim. So one question, or a couple of questions. So Tim, 1916, why didn't they occupy the Custom House, or burn the Custom House? Was it simply a matter of the countermanding order, or do you know?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's always been a bit of a mystery as to why they didn't take it over, because it was such a strategically significant building. I think maybe the scale of the building would have been tricky, and it was also, you could surround it on all sides. You know, you were able to surround it, which would have made it incredibly difficult to defend. But it is interesting. I mean, it's right across from Liberty Hall, so they were assembling there. It would, the easiest thing in the world would have been to go across to the Custom House. But I wonder if the scale of it and the fact that it could be surrounded militated against it being used.
Cool. And that was from Johnny Doyle. Nicola McCrudden asked, what was the basement used for? Was that damaged in the attack?
It was the area that was least damaged, and funnily enough, it was kind of the main storage area, but it was actually the least damaged area of the whole building, which was crucial for the future restoration of it, because obviously the supporting walls. So when you're in the basement, even though it can look very you know, uneasy on the eye, it's actually the most, except for sort of the area where the visitor center will be, it's the most intact part of the building. And it is funny because, I mean, there was the stores areas there, and the contraband would have been held there. So the stuff that was confiscated from ships, etc., would have been held there. But it was the least damaged area of the building.
Brilliant. And David Donovan asked, do you know who designed those beautiful notes?
Oh, no, but I should. I might try and put it into the chat. I'll have a look. Yeah, I'm not sure. And
Johnny Doyle, I know there is a book, but Johnny Doyle asked, any recommended books, an overview of the Custom House?
The best one is by a woman called Meredith. It was produced by the Four Courts Press, and you can still get secondhand copies online. They're a little bit pricey, so it's quite rare. I think it's Custom House and its Surroundings or something like that, and that's the one. It does it through paintings. Like, it doesn't give the whole history, but it gives a pretty complete history of it.
Okay. And just Caroline Elvey, who's the James Joyce expert, just a comment, she loved the Ulysses reference, and Pauline Kennedy came in on after that. Great idea to commemorate the Ulysses reference on Bloomsday each year, so there may be something in the future there, Tim.
Absolutely, yeah. We always do a tweeze for Bloomsday. Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And Tim, just going to read out just some of the comments. Wonderful talk. Well done, Tim. Very interesting. Many thanks, Tim, for your fantastic presentation. Well done. Well done, Tim. Very informative. Well done, Tim. Very interesting. Brilliant, Tim. Thank you. Thanks, Tim. Fantastic talk, Tim. Very informative and enjoyable. Thank you. Thank you, Tim. Brilliant presentation. Well done, Tim. Very interesting. Well done, Tim. I'm reading these out, so it's all true. And just Maura, I think a lot of people would like to see this, Maura, though, but just Maura said she'd love to see the ratings removed to bring it back to the way it was. And maybe something in the future, Tim.
Well, to be honest, I mean, we're trying to look at the whole future of the Custom House, and, you know, it would be down the road, but it's certainly, I think, that's something that, you know, everything being equal, and, you know, it'd be great to try and look at something like that, and, or, you know, do something that opens up the grounds more. And that would be, you know, it'd be the long-term wish of, I think, everyone concerned that we could do that. But you're talking, you know, long-term at this stage, but it's definitely something that would be great for the area.
And Tim, just that photograph that's showing the Loop Line Bridge, it is really striking how it did completely isolate that building from the sea. You don't really realise it until it's put up in front of you. But my God, it just completely cut it off. No, it was terrible. There probably wasn't really a choice in it, but it really was disastrous for the building. Brilliant. And sorry again, Tim, fascinating. Oh, this is a question from Niall Murray. Tim, fascinating insights. Thank you very much. Do you know if any malicious injuries claim was lodged by the relevant authorities for the destruction of the Custom House before the British administration left Ireland? Presumably, if it was, the charge against the Sinn Féin controlled Dublin Corporation would have been politely ignored. They certainly they did a very detailed inventory of what was damaged and how much it cost. So actually, it was one of the slides I was going to do. It's like, you know, mirror, carafe and glass, and it just literally goes down to everything that was destroyed. I'm not too sure the money was handed over. I'd say it probably was handed over. I would say it was part of the settlement, maybe. I couldn't be sure, but I'd say it was part of the settlement. And John Moore, really enjoyed Tim's very insightful presentation. Some great photographs. Thank you, Eddie. Kieran, thank you, Tim. Having visited the Custom House so many times when I worked in revenue and spent the last 21 years working there, you give me a whole new insight into the wonderful building. Fascinating, brilliant. Claire Palsgraf. Hey, Claire. And yeah, Tim, just fantastic comments coming in, and a fantastic talk to open the series of online talks for the conference. And just like to say a huge thank you on behalf of myself and Michal for doing the talk for us this evening. And if you're good to, are you good to finish up? Get a cup of tea. No, thanks a million. I'm delighted to hear. Yeah, exactly. No, I'm delighted to hear. And sorry, I rabbited it on. I always rabbit on for longer than I think. That's the first time I've given a talk on the Custom House. So it was so yeah, I was a bit edgy beforehand, but anyway. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant, Tim. And the comments are all there, and everyone that's good. Really enjoyed it. So thank you so much. Great. Well, thank you. And listen, the best of luck, and I'll be at all the talks, but look, the best of luck to yourself and Michal, and thanks a million for organising the lectures. It's great that we can support you, and it's great that you're doing it, because we just wouldn't have been able to do this ourselves. So I have to follow you now. No problem. And just a round of applause for Tim. Thanks a million. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, okay. I think definitely a round of applause deserved by Tim there. I think that there might be a book coming out of that yet. Okay, you ready to go, Liz?
I am, Michal. Yep.
Okay. Well, look, obviously on my behalf as well, to thank Tim for a really interesting talk on a building that's such an integral part of what we do every year. But you're our second speaker of the night, and for those who don't know her, I'll just tell you that you know, Liz is a historian and an author. She comes from Dublin Liberties. She has a degree in Irish history and currently works as a show on RTE radio. In addition, she also lectures at Champlain College, Dublin. Now, Liz was a curatorial assistant in RTE specialising in researching the Easter Rising. And she was a tour guide for many years in Kilmainham Jail, which in fact is where I first met her, as we both joined the team there in the same year. Liz took me under her wing, and over the next few years gave me a thorough grounding in Irish history. It was while in the jail that Liz began to write, and she is now the author of 6 critically acclaimed works about the Irish Revolution, including the seminal Women of the Irish History and the Hales Brothers and the Irish Revolution, and only comprehensive story of the attack, May 25, the burning of the Custom House, 1921. So Liz has worked as a researcher on numerous publications, television and radio documentaries covering the Irish Revolution. In 2018, she was a recipient of the prestigious Lord Mayor of Dublin's award for her contribution to history. So now I'll hand you over to Liz, who's going to talk on 1920, a year of terror.
Thanks a million, Michal, for that introduction. And I'm going to now share screen. Hope this works. Sounds. And okay. Let's click. Okay, so yeah, so I'm going to talk about 1920, a year of terror. And so yeah, this is a talk that I would have done last year for 2020, but because we didn't do the conference or couldn't do the conference last year, we're doing it tonight, or I'm doing it tonight. And there is a reason, as I said at the start, for launching the talks tonight, and you'll discover that throughout this talk. But 1920, the War of Independence began in January 1919, ended in July 1921, but 1920, it really is the darkest chapter of the War of Independence. But when 1920 opens, it opens with fire and it ends with fire. But to kick off, we have the January elections, the local elections that took place. Now, in 1918, Sinn Féin has swept the board with the general election. They were the only political party. They set up the All Éireann and the Irish Parliament, but that was big government. Now they set their sights on local government, because that is where you effectively run the country. So just like they had in 1918, they put forward loads of candidates, but the thing was that the British government, they were really aware of how like the rise of Sinn Féin, and wants to undermine it. So they introduced the system of proportional representation. And the reason that they did this was that they thought that the Irish electorate would not understand how PR worked, and that it would then undermine the rise of Sinn Féin. But what they didn't bank on was that Sinn Féin educated the people on how PR actually works. So it completely backfired against the British government, and Sinn Féin went on to have great success. And that was followed by more local elections in June 1920. You can just see here from the different newspaper reports of both elections. The Clarny Echo, 24th January 1920 in Tralee, first test of new systems. So they're talking about the use of PR. And then in June, sweeping victory, Ireland Republican, result of elections, 29 councils for Ireland and 4 against. So you can see there in January, Sinn Féin won control of 172 out of 206 urban councils. And then in June, they won control out of 348 out of 393 local government bodies, county councils. So the local government was run and controlled pretty much by Sinn Féin. The exception would be in Ulster, but they still did make inroads. But around the same time of the January elections, IRA GHQ in Dublin sanctioned the IRA around the country to go on the attack. Now, the RAC were the primary targets of the IRA. They were the Eisners of the British forces, the British government in Ireland, and they were targeted in ambush and so on. But now it was decided to ramp it up and attack the barracks. Now, the reason for this was that there were so many barracks. If you've seen the Atlas of the Irish Revolution, there's maps with the amount of barracks, showing the amount of barracks in the country. There's there's a huge amount of them. So the idea was, if you attacked the barracks, attacked smaller barracks, you would withdraw, or they would withdraw to the bigger barracks in the cities and the towns, and then leaving vast areas of the countryside in the control of the IRA. That's pretty much exactly what happens. And you can see here, you know, images from the newspapers and photographs of the type of attack, what was happening. And literally the IRA around the country, once that order is given, sanctioned by GHQ in Dublin, they go for it. And it's a very effective policy. Now, things begin to get worse very, very, very quickly, and it gets worse as the year goes on. And March is sort of a turning point. So Sinn Féin representatives had been elected to local government. Some, like Tomás McCourtain, they'd actually been elected as Lord Mayors, and they throughout 1920, you see, become primary targets of the Crown forces. So Tomás McCourtain had been elected Lord Mayor. He puts forth that it's a Republican council. A policeman had been shot in Cork in, I think, the 19th, 20th of March. But Tomás McCourtain had been the commandant of the Cork Brigade of the IRA in 1916. His vice commandant was Terence McSweeney. So these are like both political figureheads, and then in terms of the IRA or the volunteers, they were the figureheads there as well. So in response to the shooting of the policeman, a knock came to McCourtain's door, his home, on the morning of the 20th of March. His wife was heavily pregnant with twins. And the door was opened, and there were men with blackened faces or masks on them, and Tomás McCourtain was fatally wounded in front of his heavily pregnant wife. And this is sending a message that, you know, public figures you may be, but, you know, you are targets by the Crown forces. Now, obviously, there was a huge amount of, you know, media attention on his killing. There was an inquest, and the jury found that the Crown forces were guilty, but they named certain people, including Lloyd George and D.I. Swansea. Now, D.I. Swansea had to get out of Cork, and just to point out, McCourtain is sitting in the front row. He's slap bang in the middle there, and then the second row, the second man from my right, is Terence McSweeney. Now, the thing was, once D.I. Swansea was mentioned and named, he becomes a target for the IRA. They had him in their sights, and they weren't going to let him get away with it. Now, it took a while. It took till August to get him. They got him out of Cork. He was sent up to Lisburn, and members of the Cork IRA, armed with McCourtain's gun, accompanied by members of the Dublin Brigade of the IRA, went up to Lisburn. And you can see here from the newspaper reports, Swansea, as he was coming out of church one Sunday morning, he was shot. The first shot came from McCourtain's gun, and this was a pure act of revenge for McCourtain's killing way back in March. Now, what happened at this time, this coincided with the pogroms that were happening up in Ulster that had started in July. And we'll sort of tie into that in a few moments. Things had calmed down a little bit, and with Swansea's killing, it flared all up again, all across Lisburn and Belfast and so on, and just the violence that was unleashed was unbelievable. You can see it here from the newspaper report: reprisals in Lisburn, many houses wrecked and burned, and following the murder of Mr. Swansea, the greatest excitement prevailed in Lisburn, and the houses of a number of men who were believed to be Sinn Féiners were wrecked. The premises which were attacked were principally licensed houses, and you find that throughout this period that spirit grocers were attacked, the contents of which were thrown on the street and burned. Afterwards, the houses were set on fire, and you see during this period that a load of people just have to get out of Belfast, and they're burnt out of their homes. As I said, the violence that erupted on the streets of Belfast, Lisburn, Banbridge, and so on, it was unbelievable. And that was bad, but things got an awful lot worse very, very quickly with the arrival of these two groups. And so we have the arrival of the Black and Tans in March to Ireland, and then they're followed in July by the auxiliaries. Now, just a distinction between the two groups. So the Black and Tans were a permanent force. So they were sent here or raised to basically bulk up the numbers for the RIC, because the RIC were resigning in their droves. Many had been killed from 1919 right through to this period. It was very difficult to get people, Irishmen, to join the RIC, so the force was raised in England. Now there were Irishmen that were Black and Tans, but they were a permanent force. So the British government weren't going anywhere. So even when the War of Independence ended, these men were going to still be the police force. And they get their name, the Black and Tans, because they had the shortage of uniforms, so they did the mix and match, and Irish whip being what it is, they were quickly nicknamed the Black and Tans because of the mixture of the colours of the uniforms that they were wearing. And then we come to the auxiliaries, completely different organisation. They were a temporary organisation to be only in existence for the duration of the conflict. They were pretty much law unto themselves. They were a much smaller unit compared to the Black and Tans, and it has been said that they were taken from the prisons in England. With both groups, you had to have served in the British Army. So all of these men, the majority of them, had fought in the First World War. With the auxiliaries, you had to have been an officer. So these are battle-hardened, experienced, fearless men. They were criminals when they got over here, but they weren't criminals before they got here. But just to show you, in Dublin alone, the companies of auxiliaries that were in Dublin, so that the Dublin Brigade or the IRA were up against. You have the Depot Company based in Beggar's Bush Barracks. You had notorious F Company, S and Z Company, they're based in Dublin Castle. Q Company arrive in March, and that's to tackle the arms smuggling and stuff down in the docks, and they're based in the London Northwestern Hotel. And then you had R Company as well. Now, added on to that, you had the DMP of the police, you also had RIC in County Dublin, because the seat was a lot smaller back then, but also then you had the ordinary British military. And if anyone knows Dublin, there was a ring of steel around Dublin. The amount of barracks that were in Dublin City was unbelievable. So there was a huge amount of Crown forces that the IRA in Dublin were pitched against. But with their arrival, their presence is felt pretty much immediately, and it just goes downhill from there. Now, we come to tonight. We come to the 3rd and 4th of April. And you'd actually think it was an April Fool's joke the way it played out, but it wasn't. So, the 4th anniversary of the Easter Rising. Now, Dick McKee, the Brigade OC, the Commandant of the Dublin Brigade of the IRA, he just seemed to have the custom house in his sights from day one. As soon as he came up with the idea in 1918 to do something that was to attack the custom house, he just seemed to have something to be in his bonnet about getting to the custom house. The first time he raises the idea is in 1918 to respond to the threat of conscription. Conscription wasn't introduced, so the attack didn't happen, and he was planning something along the lines of 1916. And this is when the volunteers were only reorganising. They hadn't got many guns at all, but the attack didn't come off because conscription wasn't introduced. April 1920, he wants to attack the custom house again, and he put it forward to GHQ in Dublin, and they said, "Grant, but no, we're going to do something bigger." And basically the authorities, they knew something was afoot, and what they thought was going to happen was actually another rising to mark the 4th anniversary of the Easter Rising, and it would begin on the 3rd or 4th of April. So what they did was, and you can see from this photograph here from the Daily Sketch on the 5th of April 1920, they put a ring of steel around Dublin City. So barricades were thrown up to all points entering the city. Look, you can see how many soldiers there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 soldiers searching one man. And there's, what, 2 kids watching what's going on. So this is happening. It's on the newspapers where they're talking about barricades being erected and the military in control. And they've got everything in control. And if anything happens, they're going to stop it. My God, did they get it wrong? Because this is actually what happens. The whole country went up. It went on fire. And you can see from this newspaper report, it's a perfect title, Bonfires of Easter Eve. And what the IRA in Dublin had sanctioned was that the IRA across the country, top, bottom, north, south, east, west, was to hit every income tax record office around the country. And also to destroy the evacuated RIC barracks, because there was that fear, especially with the arrival of the Black and Tans, because the numbers are being reinforced, that those barracks could be reoccupied. So stop that, just destroy the barracks. And the newspaper reports that follow those, like that week after, is just literally records destroyed, evacuate RIC barracks destroyed. You can see here burning police barracks and captured custom houses, dramatic coup, thrilling stories of how income tax papers were destroyed, stand and deliver, county collectors held up by armed men, rate collectors reported refusal. And this is just how the newspapers just describe what happened. So dramatic. Here we go again. The Irish independence on the 5th of April. Many amazing raids throughout Ireland. Income tax papers destroyed. Burnt and torn. Extraordinary series of fires. Great damage caused. And you can see it here. An amazing series of raids was made in Dublin and many parts of Ireland on Saturday night. And just the newspapers just full of these reports. So you can imagine how the government felt. And there was actually an account in one of the newspapers slagging off one of the politicians who basically had said the rising was going to happen and they were getting help from the Germans. And it's like, the rising never happened, didn't you? You got it wrong. And they did get it wrong. But the Custom House, as I said, Dick McKay, he just had a bee in his bonnet about the Custom House. And he wanted to even send in men to attack just the income the income tax record section in the Custom House on the 3rd and 4th of April. And they basically didn't do it because the guy that was put in charge said that it was too risky, it was too dangerous. So basically then McKee says, okay, let's attack the income tax office across the road from the Custom House, which was on Beresford Place. And we have this, the BMH witness statement from George Fitzgerald. He was of A Company, 4th Battalion. And he was walked in on this meeting where Dick McKay is basically saying, I want to attack, I want it attacked. If you can't attack the one in the Custom House, you have to attack Beresford Place. But the guy just said no, he wouldn't do it. So George Fitzgerald, we have his account here, he said he'd do it. But this is in the 2nd Battalion area of Dublin Brigade. So if we look at Dublin, the way it was sort of split up between the IRA, the Dublin Brigade, you had 5 battalions in Dublin in the War of Independence, just up to this period. And it was the 1st Battalion and 2nd Battalion operating on the north side of the city. O'Connell Street was their dividing line. So the 1st went from O'Connell Street out to the Phoenix Park, all Blackhall Place and so on, Phibsborough, all out that way. 2nd Battalion was O'Connell Street down to the North Wall, out to Fairview, Clontarf, all that way. So the Custom House is slap bang in the middle of the 2nd Battalion area. 3rd and 4th on the south side of the city. Camden Street was their dividing line. The 3rd Battalion will be from Camden Street all the way down to Ringsend, out as far as Bray. That then becomes the 2nd Dublin Brigade later on. And then the 4th Battalion would be Camden Street, out as far as Ballyfermot, Clondalkin, Crumlin, Liberties. That's all their areas. The 5th Battalion was the engineers, and that was made up of men who were engineers, but taken from each of the battalions and just amalgamated into their own unique. You also had a cyclist section as well. But this is George Fitzgerald of A Company, 4th Battalion. And basically, What he says is that he would do it, and his plan was simple. All I wanted was to be supplied with a long and a short crowbar, and that I would select my men from A Company of the 1st Battalion, who are known as the 40 Thieves. Now, I just came across this last week. If anyone knows what the 40 Thieves means, who they were, how they got that name, will you please let me know, because it's intriguing. You can just imagine, I just had this vision in my head of these 40 fellas just walking around Dublin, like, you know, doing whatever. But there has to be a reason why they're called that. So if anyone knows, please let me know. I went around and picked my men and told them to report at 44 Parnell Square that night. That was the headquarters. We arrived on the job at exactly 9 p.m. carrying petrol and 2 crowbars, which are brought from Parnell Square. Joe Dolan and myself had 2 crowbars. We walked up to the door, inserted the crowbars between the locks, pressed on the door, and are opened without any difficulty. The remainder of the party had come along in pairs into the building. 3 men were already told off to each floor to collect all documents, place them in the middle of the floor, and sprinkle them with petrol. When this was done, all men assembled in the hall, and 1 man was detailed to light each floor in turn, starting from the top floor. The fire gone immediately, and we left the building satisfied that our job was well done. And I may add that what we failed to destroy, the fire brigade ruined with war, as some of our members were attached to it. Now, if you just take that one attack in Beresford Place, that is literally what happens with the Custom House burning on the 25th of May 1921. So they were practicing what was going to actually come in the future. And there we have the fire brigade, very, very important to the revolution in actually damaging buildings. And as Tim mentioned in his talk, the Custom House, it burned for days and days and days, thanks to the Dublin Fire Brigade. But you'll hear more about that talk, or about that, from Laz Fallon and myself then on the 25th of May. So that's just one example, and there's so many witness statements by guys that were involved in attacks in Belfast, in Tyrone, in Cork, as I said, up and down the country went on fire. Now, not only did that take place that weekend, you also had the hunger strike going on in Mountjoy. So there had been a lot of arrests. IRA men had been picked up, some had been put on trial and sentenced and put in prison in Mountjoy, others were awaiting trial, and they were being treated as common criminals. We know from Thomas Ashe, his hunger strike in 1917, he died as a result of the forced feeding, and basically the British government were unwilling to recognise these men and later women as political prisoners. So they went on the hunger strike as a way to protest to get political status. But see, Paddock Clancy, he was the driving force behind this hunger strike, and not only did they like destroy their cells and you know, go on the hunger strike, but they wanted to be released. They just didn't want political status, they wanted to be released. And the government made another huge mistake. They said to release only those who hadn't been sentenced, but the authorities released all of the hunger strikers from prison. So I think it was over 100 of them. So if you can imagine, the government are waiting for this rising to take place, and what actually happens is the country goes up in flames, and then they release 100 IRA men back onto the streets. So it was a huge coup for the IRA. But the story doesn't end there, and I couldn't believe it when I discovered this this in the newspapers. And you can see here, punitive claims. Governments attempted fraud upon the ratepayers. Now, obviously, with some cases, it wasn't just the records that were destroyed. There were actual buildings destroyed around the country. So the income tax offices themselves were destroyed. So you can imagine big claims being put in. However, we have this one. 320,000, this is from Dublin, £320,000. That was the claim that they put in, and it was Inland Revenue. And look, for books of which duplicates exist, and applications that must be resisted. And then this letter that accompanied this article in the newspaper, and it's just brilliant. And I have to read it out to you. So, sir, in view of the statement made by Sir Robert Anderson, chairman of the Board of Inland Revenue, because look, it was the income tax records that went up, so people, I don't think too many people would be too sad that their income tax records went up. But Sir Robert Anderson, chairman of the Board of Inland Revenue, that none would escape payment of income tax by reason of the burnings, as duplicates of all assessments are kept at headquarters. Close inquiry becomes necessary into the grounds on which are based the enormous figures now being claimed by the Inland Revenue people as compensation for income tax books and offices. It would appear a simple matter to obtain these duplicates from headquarters, the Custom House, and set a special staff to the work of copying them. Or the work might perhaps be performed by the ordinary staff, seeing that their ordinary activities have been short-circuited for the present by the burnings. The sum of £10,000 would cover an enormous quantity of income tax stationery, even at the present exalted prices of paper, and would no doubt pay for new assessment books for all of Ireland. So there was Inland Revenue trying to defraud the people, but they got caught. But the other thing is, if the IRA didn't know that there were duplicates, they knew there were now. And they knew that they were where they were stationed in the headquarters in Dublin in the Custom House. So it was never a case of the Custom House wasn't going to be hit. It was a case of when the Custom House was going to be hit. It was always in their sights. Now, 1919 and 1920, the story certainly of the revolution in Dublin, it is dominated by the activities of Michael Collins and the squad, his intelligence unit, and then later, December 1920, beyond that, the active service unit. And there were some big operations carried out by the different battalions of the IRA, but it is the assassinations of the G-men of the DMP, where Collins basically completely destroys the British intelligence network, and it had never been done before, and they were totally caught off guard, but they reorganized, and again, like the RAC, it was difficult to recruit people, Irishmen, to become G-men and so on. And also you had a number of G-men working for Collins, where Collins had his spies. It's amazing, the network of spies. They were literally everywhere, in the post offices, in the banks, in Dublin Castle, anywhere you can think of, they were there. But it does begin to change with the arrival of, with the appointment of this man, and that is Brigadier General Sir Ormond Winter, also known as the Holy Terror. And he was, director of British intelligence. Now, you don't get a nickname like that for being a nice person. And his appointment, the effects of his appointment, again, were felt pretty quickly. Now, he brought a lot of his own people with him. So recruited agents that had served abroad, some became known as the Cairo Gang, some had served in Russia, in Egypt, in Poland, all First World War service, and intelligence. A lot of them had been involved in intelligence work. But just a couple to point out to you, you've got Lieutenant William Lorraine Tiny King. There's nothing tiny about him. Look at the bloody size of him. And he was a member of F Company Auxiliaries. As I said, that notorious group of the auxiliaries that were stationed in Dublin Castle, and his comrade, his colleague, for want of a better word, was Captain Jocelyn Lee Hoppy Hardy of the Connacht Rangers. Now, he was attached to F Company Auxiliaries. You did not want to be picked up by these two. Ernie O'Malley talks about them in his book, On Another Man's Wound, I think it is, the interrogations in Dublin Castle and so on. Literally, if you were interrogated by these two, you were lucky if you only got a small hiding. And then we have Lieutenant Henry James Angus, who was a Royal Enniskillen Fusiliers. Now, these are just the tip of the iceberg of O's, Ormond Winter's agents and intelligence officers. Now, the other thing is that unlike the DMP men who were in Dublin Castle, who were living in Dublin Castle or living in the barracks, the agents they had a cover in that they were businessmen, they were civilians, so they lived in lodging houses around Dublin City. and they were meant to be completely invisible, completely unknown. And it did work for a time, because they did have successes very, very quickly against the IRA. And it began to escalate, and the threat became very real to Collins and his network. Now, June 1920. So we already talked about Swansea being shot up in Lisburn as a result of McCurtain's killing. We then have this man, Lieutenant Colonel Bryce Ferguson Smith. So you have the arrival of the Black and Tans, the auxiliaries were coming. You have the reorganisation of British intelligence, so successes begin to take place, and then we have this man making this speech to a number of policemen, RIC men in Listowel in County Kerry, where basically he said Sinn Féin has had all the sport up to present, and we are going to have the sport now. I am promised as many troops from England as I require. Thousands are coming daily, so you're talking the Black and Tans, British soldiers and so on, and later the Auxies. Police and military will patrol the country at least 5 nights a week. They are not to confine themselves to the main roads, but take across the country, lie in ambush, and when civilians are seen approach, and shout hands up. Should the order not be immediately obeyed, shoot, and shoot with effect. If persons approach and carrying with their hands in their pockets and are in any way suspicious looking, shoot them down. We want your assistance in carrying out the scheme and wiping out Sinn Féin. Also, he added, and I'm paraphrasing, that if you make mistakes, so be it, nothing's going to happen to you. Now you can see there just from the headline then, the response from the police. There was the mutiny, it's known as the Listowel Mutiny, where 8 RIC men resigned in Kerry after he makes a speech, and that makes him a target for the IRA. They now have him in their sights. And on the 17th July 1920, he was shot dead in Cork, in the county club in Cork City. And the thing was, he was from Banbridge, and his body was brought back up to Banbridge. But this, as you can see, 17th July is the key date. The 24th of July is when his body was brought back up to Banbridge. The shipyard expulsions had just happened in Belfast. Edward Carson had made a speech on the 12th of July, basically saying the British government weren't going to do anything, well, we're not going to stand idly by, we're going to protect ourselves. And there was a lot of tension built up. The expulsions happened, and then when his body was brought back up to Banbridge, it was when the holiday, the 12th of July holidays had ended. And you have the railway workers that refused to take his body on the train, and again it creates even further tension, and pretty much Banbridge goes up. So that starts that with the shipyard expulsions is the first round of the pogroms, dies off a little bit, and then is flared back up with the shooting of Swansea in Lisburn. And then as 1920 progresses, it descends and descends and descends. And what I found sort of when looking at the War of Independence, it does go in waves, as in the IRA have their successes, the British are totally caught off guard, undermined, and then they come back, they have successes, and then they think the IRA are on their knees, and then the IRA come back at them, and it goes like that really, certainly in 1920, from mid-1920, that's the way it goes. And in the autumn of 1920, that's exactly what was happening, because, or exactly did happen, because the British had reorganised. You had the arrival of the auxiliaries now at this stage, and they were tearing all around the country. As I said, their presence was felt pretty much immediately. You had, by this stage, towns all across the country burnt in reprisal for ambushes carried out by the IRA. Milton, Malbay, you had Balbriggan, there was Trim, there was Mallow, there was loads of towns and cooperatives and creameries and houses of Sinn Féin representatives being burnt. And then we come to losses that the IRA suffered in the autumn. So 14th of October, Sean Tracy, who pretty much had kicked off the War of Independence with Dan Breen, Seamus Robinson and Sean Hogan down in Sola Headbeg, with the ambush of the RAC down there on the 24th of January 1919. He and Dan Breen had basically escaped the net of the British military at Fernside. You had the Fernside ambush the night before, led by Bryce Ferguson Smith's brother, who thought it was Dan Breen that had something to do with his shooting down in Cork. Intelligence officers had followed them around Dublin. They'd been up in Dublin because they were operating with the squad and Collins's men. And they went to the house of Professor Carolyn. The soldiers come, and Smith calls out looking for Breen, and I think it was Breen that actually shot Smith. So not only had you had Bryce Ferguson Smith shot, you then had his brother killed as well by the man who we thought had killed his brother, but he actually killed him. Dan Breen was seriously wounded. He and Sean Tracy split up. Sean Tracy was all right, but he was totally preoccupied with the safety of Dan Breen. Didn't know where he was, if he was okay. It was mess. Paddock Clancy and Dick McKee in the Republican Outfitters in Talbot Street. They were trying to organise for Dan Breen to be gotten to safety in a hospital and so on. So he wasn't actually thinking about himself. He was thinking about Dan Breen. And the military arrived. Sean Tracy took the wrong bicycle, and a shootout followed, and Sean Tracy was killed. And that was a huge loss for the IRA, not just the Tipperary IRA, but also the Dublin IRA, because they had been involved in numerous engagements in Dublin. That was followed a little over a week later by the death on hunger strike of the Lord Mayor of Cork, Terence McSweeney. So when McCourtin was killed or murdered in his home in March, who succeeded him as Lord Mayor was Terence McSweeney. And he'd been arrested in August, and like the others in April in Mountjoy, he was treated like a common criminal. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison, but the hunger strike had started in Cork jail, so he joined the hunger strike. A very public figure, but they transferred him to Brixton Prison in England, and he continued his hunger strike. Now, both sides were hardening their attitudes at this stage, and the British government were not going to make the same mistake like they did in April. They weren't going to release McSweeney or any of the others from prison. And McSweeney died after 75 days on hunger strike. But again, a huge loss to the IRA. Now, in response to this, the IRA GHQ in Dublin issue a directive that the IRA were to basically kill anyone in uniform. RIC, Crown Forces, Auxies, Black and Tans, didn't matter. Once they were in uniform, go for them. And this was in response to McSweeney. Kevin Barry, at that time, basically the word was coming through that they were waiting on the word that would he be executed, would he be reprieved, because he had been arrested at the raid on Monk's Bakery just off Church Street there in Dublin. And so basically this is what the IRA do in response to that, is put out this directive. Now, the IRA didn't really follow it, except in Kerry. And on the 31st of October, basically they went on a rampage and they shot 17 RIC Crown Forces. 7 were fatally wounded. And Kevin Barry, his sentence was not reprieved, it was not commuted. Kevin Barry was executed on the 1st of November for his part in that raid amongst Bakery, where 3 soldiers did die. So they're the losses, and it looks like the IRA are buckling. The IRA are losing their strength, they're not having successes, the British having successes against them. And it made the British Prime Minister Lloyd George was so confident that of the successes that they were having against the IRA, that he made this speech at the Lord Mayor's banquet in London on the 9th of November 1920, where he says, there in Ireland we have witnessed a spectacle of organised assassination of the most cowardly character, but at last, unless I'm mistaken, by the steps we have taken, we have murder by the throat. Now, not just in terms of the loss of Sean Tracy and Terence McSweeney, with the British intelligence, they were having successes. They were targeting the IRA, and a number of IRA men had been killed, and civilians as mistaken identity. So Collins saw this, that something big was coming. Someone had to strike first, and he decided it would be him. So he put forward his plans to assassinate the British agents. It was sanctioned by Cathal Brugha, who was Minister for Defence. He had the final say. Lists were drawn and redrawn, names were taken off. There were 50 originally, then 15 were taken off because Cathal Brugha, there wasn't enough evidence against certain people to have their names on the list to be targeted. So on the day was chosen, 24th November. 9 o'clock in the morning, and the reason that Collins wanted to move quickly is because the British intelligence got really close, as in they had arrested 3 of his key men, Frank Thornton, Tom Cullen, and I think Liam Tobin. They didn't know who they had, but they let them go, and it wouldn't be long before they came looking for them again. So Collins literally had to strike. So if you can imagine it, 9 o'clock in the morning, and this was a massive operation. So we see pretty much all the units of the battalions of the Dublin Brigade being involved, but predominantly, you can see from this map from bloodysunday.co.uk that most of the addresses to be targeted were on the south side of the city, in the Sword Battalion area, so all around Pembroke Street, Bagot Street, and so on. But you would have the intelligence officers accompanying a group of men, because they had to identify the agent or the person that was on the list, and then members of the squad were there as well, and they would kill them. Now, there were civilians killed, their mistakes were made, but if you can imagine it, literally 9 o'clock Sunday morning, the only sound would be the birds chirping and the bells, the church bells ringing, and then you hear the knocks on the doors opening, the shouts, and then you hear the screams, and then you hear the gunshots, and then all hell breaks loose, and they were gone. As soon as this operation began, it was over in minutes. 14 were killed on the scene, including a civilian, Smith. You have 2 auxiliary cadets that were killed. You have Colonel Montgomery, who was fatally wounded. He died later as a result of his wounds, and you can imagine the anger that was felt by the auxiliaries when word arrived in Dublin Castle as to what had happened, and panic. Like there's again descriptions of just people scrambling to get into Dublin Castle, to the safety of Dublin Castle, the fortress that was Dublin Castle. And it was the people that paid the price for the events of that morning. Crow Park, the match that was had been organised between Dublin and Tipperary. It was the fundraising match, and that match was going to be raided by the military, so they were going to go there. But that's all that was meant to happen at Crow Park that day, apart from the match. But the auxiliaries and the police arrived before the military, and they set up positions, and they opened fire on the crowd. The game had only started. And you can see the youngest victims of the events that day. William Robinson, aged 11, Jerome O'Leary, he was only 10, and John William Scott, 14 years of age. And you can see it there, 13 civilians killed, many injured in the stampede. You've Jane Boyle, the only woman to be killed that day. She was meant to be married the following week. Instead, she was buried in her wedding dress. That wasn't enough, because then that night we have the events in Dublin Castle, in the guard room in Dublin Castle. So even despite the fact that civilians had been shot, they had nothing to do with the events of that morning. And in the guard room, in the custody of the auxiliaries, were 3 men. Now, a number of men had been arrested in the days leading up to it, but the night before, you had Dick McKay, Commandant of the Dublin Brigade, Paddy Clancy, originally Vice Commandant. He was then transferred over to GHQ Munitions, and then Conor Clune, who had come up to Dublin on Gaelic League business. Has been stated that he was a volunteer, but he was up in Dublin on Gaelic League business. And he was in Vaughan's Hotel. Now, the night before Bloody Sunday, McKay and Clancy had met with Collins and the others who had been planning Bloody Sunday, but then they got word there was a raid coming, so they all dispersed. McKay and Clancy make their way to Sean Fitzpatrick's house on Gloucester Street, what's now Sean McDermott Street. They didn't know they were being followed by Shankers Ryan. He was an informer or a military policeman and got word to Dublin Castle. And literally as the auxiliaries arrive, as the Crown forces arrive, Dick McKay had burnt the list of names to be targeted next morning. Paddy Clancy, and I just found out this recently, had burnt the list of names that had been taken off the list. So they were taken to Dublin Castle. Conor Clune, he was arrested. He hadn't got a credible story, so he was taken. And then that night, the early hours of the morning of the Monday, the three men, and big inverted commas here, were shot trying to escape. They were murdered in the guard room in Dublin Castle. Now, you've probably seen the photographs, the staged photographs that were released. You know the room, you can see it in Exchange Court, and that's where it was. The window was tiny, there's bars on it. How the hell they were going to get out the window? It's amazing. But the story that was released officially, they were shot trying to escape. Not a hope in hell of it, but they were murdered in response to the events that morning. But look at the response from the British, and then we look at Collins. So this is Lloyd George. This is what he said about the men who were killed on the morning. The officers got what they deserved. They were beaten by counter jumpers. Then we have Churchill talking about the agents that were killed on the Sunday morning. They were careless fellows. They ought to have taken precautions. Now imagine being the wife, mother, father of those men who were sent over here on their bidding, on Lloyd George and Winston Churchill's bidding, and they get killed, and this is what their government think of them. Now, they got state funeral and so on, but that's what they thought about them. Like, Michael Collins came out and risked his own personal safety to go to the funeral of McKee and Clancy. They were his friends. The loss of McKee and Clancy was huge, not just in terms of the military aspect and what they brought to the IRA, but on a personal level, because they were really, really admired men and friends of those in the IRA. And the auxiliaries, as I said, had a reputation, and they were fearsome. They were fearless, and they were greatly feared. But Tom Barry decided that he had to show them that they weren't invincible. And so literally 24th November, you've got Bloody Sunday. A week later, you have the Kilmichael ambush, where Tom Barry, Commandant of the 3rd West Cork Brigade Flying Column, he led this ambush, and basically had a tunic on him, what looked like a British officer's uniform, stood out in the middle of the road. The two army lorries would come up, and they would stop. Then he would throw a grenade in, and that's exactly what happened. And then the Flying Column run completely surround the area, and they would open fire. They wiped out the patrol of the auxiliaries. 18, 17, I think, died at the scene. One managed to escape, and they got him later. So everyone was wiped out. 3 volunteers were killed on that day. And that was a huge blow to the morale of the auxiliaries. And then that's followed very quickly by Dillon's Cross, the ambush in Dillon's Cross on the 11th of December 1920. And it was done pretty much along the same lines as Kilmichael, in that the officer in charge of the IRA wore, like, what could be assumed to be a British military uniform. So standing again in front, out on the road, make the patrol slow down, and then you can attack them. And that's exactly what happened. But what followed then, martial law was declared in Cork. And you can see here now, you had there was curfew introduced, and certain areas of the country had been proclaimed sort of military areas. But then we have the declaration of martial law in Cork, and just to read it out to you, so what it actually meant. So martial law has been declared in the counties of Cork, Tipperary, Kerry and Limerick, and that would then extend in 1921. Irishmen understand this. Great Britain has no quarrel with Irishmen. Her sole quarrel is with crime, outrage and disorder. Her sole object is declaring military martial law is to restore peace to a distracted and unhappy country. Her sole enemies are those who have countenanced, inspired and participated in rebellion, murder and outrage. After the 27th of December, so this is a long time, 2 weeks after Dillon's Cross ambush, 1920, any unauthorised person found in possession of arms, ammunition or explosives would be liable on conviction by a military court to suffer death. So the courts weren't sitting, well, they were pretty defunct at that stage, because the Republican courts had been set up. Any unauthorised person wearing the uniform or equipment of His Majesty's naval, military, air, or police forces, or wearing similar clothing likely to deceive, so exactly what happened at Carmichael and Dillon's Cross, will be liable on conviction to suffer death, and any person in unauthorised possession of such uniform, clothing, or equipment will be liable on conviction by a military court to suffer penal servitude. So you can see the impact of the Carmichael and Dillon's Cross ambushes on martial law, because they're specifically stating there, if you're dressed in even similar to a British officer, then you're going to pay for it. And the people of Cork paid for the Dillon's Cross ambush. The people of Cork City paid for the Dillon's Cross ambush because the Black and Tans, the auxiliaries, destroyed it. And you can see here just the images. It was compared to France in the First World War. And it was also compared to Dublin city centre in 1916. That's what the devastation was like in Cork City. And we all just know Cork City, like Patrick Street. It's you know, it's a very compact area, but the devastation that was unleashed that night. And the fire brigade, the Dublin Fire Brigade, went down to help. The fire brigade were shot at, and their hoses were cut. And literally the auxiliaries, the police just went on the rampage. And that was 1920. And it was bad. Like you see, it started with fire, it ends with fire. And it is really, really, you know, dark. And the thing was, nobody knew when this was going to end. And the thing was, things were going to get a lot worse before they were going to get better. But I can't end on a dark note, and because I found this when I was researching for this talk last year. I searched high and low for a good news story to end, you know, 1920. You know, someone get married, or you know, something good happen. Couldn't find one. Could I find a funny story? Found one. And I'll always try and connect the liberties, because I love the liberties. So if I can get the liberties in anywhere, I will. And I found this story in a Carey newspaper, but it has a connection to the conflict. And you can see it here. Schoolboys escapade. We are Black and Tans. Come on till we break the windows, said 3 schoolboys named John Rafferty, Lee McCabe and Chris Haslam, whose fathers were ordered by Mr. Cooper, KC, in the Southern Police Court to pay for a plate glass window, which they were charged with breaking in the shop of Mrs. Bourne of 94 Meath Street in Dublin. That's just down the road from me. Now, I'd say those kids, when their dads got home, they got battered, because as you can see, they had to pay for the plate glass window. But we only tend to think of kids as victims in this conflict. But here we see the actual reality of what the kids were witnessing. They'd heard the stories of the Black and Tans, you know, setting fire to towns, smashing up places and smashing windows and destroying creameries and so on. And these kids were pretending to be them. They made a game out of it, but didn't realise the seriousness of their actions. Their fathers had to pay for it. But just to show you that history is all around us, here's the shop. It's still there on Meath Street. It's now the Algerian Barbers. And that's what I'm going to finish on, just to show that antisocial behaviour was alive and kicking way back in 1920, but the war, the conflict, it didn't just affect adults, and kids weren't just victims. Kids were impacted by the conflict because they were living it every day. And I'd just like to say, before I end, a huge, huge, huge thank you to Micheál, partner in crime, the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, the Minister, Tim, Sean Hogan and Jerry Shannon and all the staff there, Military Archives, Irish Newspaper Archives, Michael Lenihan for the Cork stuff, Cathy Scuffle, and there isn't a PowerPoint screen big enough to say a massive, massive thank you to Jerry McCarthy, and everyone. On that note, I will say thanks a million for listening to me. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Liz. You never ever fail to amaze me, not just to the depth of your research, or what you do or what you say, but how you say it. It comes over, it's real, it's living. You really do drag us into it. And that is, you know, that's obvious from the comments we've been getting online here. So many of them. and indeed, it's hard to, there's so many complimentary ones, so trying to find the questions in there is actually hard to do so. I mean, David Donovan, amazing. To start off with, first question, how do they organise and coordinate this for one night? This is the burning of everywhere on the one night.
Oh, how do they organise it?
Yeah, and coordinate it.
Coordinate. So basically, and again, witness statements are all there, but basically orders are sent out to the commandants of the different brigades from GHQ in Dublin. So whether that would be, they don't say how word was sent, so I'm presuming that it was probably through a friendly, postmaster or something like that, or, coming them on, because they were ferrying messages up and down and that type of thing. But they do mention that word was sent, because for certainly the Ulster battalions and Belfast in particular, because the difference with the Ulster brigades, where they weren't to go on the offensive, they were to be defensive, because a completely different situation up there. But this was the first operation that was sanctioned by GHQ for them, that they took part in. So in the statements, they just say word came from GHQ that we were to go out on the night of the 3rd or 4th and the Saturday night, and we were to attack any of the local income tax offices in our area, and whatever way you did that was up to you, but it was to just destroy the records. No one was to be killed, no one was killed, and it was just hugely successful. They all carried, from pretty much what I can see, they all carried out the directive. So yeah, it was just an order sent, and lads not told how to do it, but just do it. And also at the same time, any evacuated barracks in the area, set them on fire as well.
Okay, thanks, Liz. The Brian O'Neill says a really interesting talk, and then we come to a few. You really tickled people's fancy when you talked about the 40 thieves. Love it, the 40 thieves, Alibaba and the 40 thieves. Probably a reference to a New York gang in the 80s. Maura Murphy says, can't see the 40 thieves that Liz Gillis mentioned being involved in any children's storybooks, but I would love to hear that story. There are some further comments directly on Facebook as well. You'll see them on that. Brendan Kelly says, great, Liz, thanks. And again, coming back to the 40 thieves, David Donovan, I'd love to know the original story now, to see what the inspiration for it was. Yeah, Sir Ormond looks like he would be a holy terror. Indeed he does. Kathy Schofield says, excellent as always. Congratulations to Liz and Micheál. Sean Deegan says, one death on Bloody Sunday that intrigues me is that of Lieutenant Henry Emile Sperry, who committed suicide in Dublin Castle on the night of the 21st. Why did he not include it as the 33rd victim of the day? Was he murdered by his own because of what he saw in the castle that night? With McKee, Clancy and Clune, or could he not handle what he saw that night?
I honestly don't know, have the definitive answer to that question, but what I would sort of take from it, what I've sort of just heard from it, and I think like Paul O'Brien would be more well up on this now, because he wrote about the Auxies and stuff, is that they couldn't handle what had happened. And the thing, there were a lot of suicides by the Crown forces in that period, not just at Bloody Sunday, and it was intended to be admitted. Now whether that would be so the families could get compensation like a pension or so on, I'm not sure, but I would just take it that it just got to him, rather than his colleagues killing him or murdering him, because there was an Auxie, John Reynolds, who was given information to Collins, who actually gave some of the names of the guys that were targeted that day. And when he was discovered, he was sentenced to death. Now the truth saved him, but I'd say he would certainly have been, if they had got their hands on him, they would have, God knows what they would have done to him. But I've never heard that he was murdered. I've just always heard that it just got to him and he took his own life.
Yeah. International response here for you, for me, O'Hara. Congratulations from Florida. Excellent presentation. I'm learning a lot. Thank you all. Robert Butler, great. Best of luck. Great talk tonight. David Donovan, yep, the Mead Street. Hello from South. Johnny Doyle makes the point. In 1920, Liverpool docks and warehouses were set alight by the Liverpool IRA, as the bodies of Bloody Sunday officers were sent to London for burial.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, no, I hadn't heard that either.
Wow.
We had.
Thanks, Johnny, for that. Sorry, Michael.
It's okay when we're well worth looking into. Mary McCauley, well done. All concerned. Kieran McMullen, great talk. Thank you. Kathy Scuffle, all the kids have the liberties. Oh, there one or two of us are blow-ins. We're not all there. Michael Curran, Liz, Tim, and Mihal, well done. Great stuff. Tommy Haggerty, excellent talks this evening. Cheers. Happy Easter. Brady Carpenter, thanks to all involved tonight. Many thanks, Liz, as always. Neil McGlynn. Caroline Elbey, thanks to all who made this possible. Sinead McKenna, thanks for a very informative talk. David Donovan, brilliant, thank you. Patricia Wardle, thank you so much, brilliant. Great talk, Liz, well delivered from Tom Kavanagh. Thomas Leahy, great talk, Liz. Does GHQ Dublin centrally therefore control what types of action IRA units across the island can do during the War of Independence? Or is there regional autonomy for units?
They tried. They tried, but it was pointless. Like, you know, sort of, because the whole, and this is sort of is reflected then when the active service unit is set up in Dublin. They tried to assert their authority over that, and if they can't control Dublin, they can't control the rest of the country. But if they had, what they were trying to do was, that say the IRA in Cork, the likes of Tom Barry, say, oh, I want to ambush this thing. Oh, send it up to you. Then that'll take a day or two. Then you send it back to me with yes or no and so on. So the opportunity would be lost, but also you have the risk then of that information being intercepted. So the local IRA in the country units, just they saw an opportunity, they take it, and then would sort of send in the information after it happened. So if it was intercepted, it didn't matter because the event had taken place. So you have just this, record of it. And when they set up the active service unit in Dublin, so you had the flying columns around the country. So this would be like the version of the flying column in the city, a full-time dedicated unit of like 50 men taken from each of the 4 battalions. And they numbered the same as the battalions. So number 1, section 2, 3, 4 section. And Paddy Flanagan, he was actually over the ASU, so he was in charge of the main body of men that went to Pembroke Street, the worst place that was hit on Bloody Sunday. And GHQ, they talk about it. GHQ told them, right, basically, we'll tell you where to go and ambush, and so you wait around on the streets and watch the patrols and all. And like one section nearly got arrested, and they just went, no way, here, no, we'll do our own thing. And they just basically said to GHQ, we see an opportunity, we're going to take it, and then if we need permission, we'll come back to you, but we're not going to wait. Because it was really like nearly, I think it was number 1 section was pretty much completely arrested. They got out by the skin of their teeth because they were waiting and watching a patrol and then going to GHQ for permission, and it was stupid. So that was knocked on the head pretty quickly. They tried, God love them, but it didn't work.
Yeah. Another question. Well done, thank you, from Tiger Brown. Did the anti-treaty IRA during the Civil War ever attempt to repeat income tax papers?
No, but I've never heard that. But at that time, so 1922, they would have been only recreating the records. So and people weren't too quick to be sending in now their returns. And myself and Michal, we've come across they were actually offering people money to send in their income tax returns so they could recreate them. Because what you and again, it fits into us saying that the custom house was always in their sights. Like, as long as Dick McKee was on the planet, you know, the custom house was going to be hit. He just had something in his head about it. And GHQ, when he went to GHQ that time, in April, that was his plan, to attack the custom house. But they just said, look, let's attack the actual records first. So the originals are in the local income tax offices around the country. Just wait, and then they find out, they're told where the duplicates are. So it just made it, you know, a lot handier for them to go and just destroy the duplicates. So everything was destroyed, as in the income tax records, by 1921, when they came in on the 25th of May. But there was a bit of difficulty in trying to get people to send in their records, despite the, you know, the offer of money to do so. And with the Civil War then, no, there was so stuff relating to money, in that there was a number of banks, you know, that were there were robberies and so on, to fund the anti-treaty IRA. But I haven't heard of anything where they were trying to attack any records like that, because they were pretty much gone, and trying to recreate them.
Okay, good. Thanks, Liz. Maura Riley says, brilliant, Liz. Love your enthusiasm as usual. You really bring us right back. Manus O'Riordan, Harbour, Liz, congratulations. Cecilia Hartnell, brilliant talk, Liz. Noel Fleming, Liz, you're a force of nature. Absolutely wonderful from start to finish. Thank you. Johnny Doyle makes the comment that there were barricades put up all around Downing Street after the Liverpool dock fires.
Wow.
Palsgrave, brilliant talk, Liz. Louisa Hancock, excellent as always, Liz. Your passion for history always shines through. Johnny Doyle, really great start to the run up to 25th of May. Well done, everyone. James Langton, thank you, everyone. Really enjoyed tonight's lectures. Deirdre Colgan, could listen to you all day, Liz. Great insights and enjoyable talks from John Moore. Varney Crombie, hi, volunteer. Deirdre Colgan, makes sense. Brian O'Neill, the thing about Liz is that she has a totally natural presentation of her history because she lives it. That way she engages the audience and brings us into the story of our history, and that's so true. Patricia Wardell, do you know more about the IRA units in Athlone? I remember my mother and uncle talking about the Black and Tans raiding the islands in Loughree, and the boats coming back to Athlone with many injured men. In Athlone, the local barracks was a major British stronghold.
I don't personally, as in I would just, you know from the sort of general sort of story, but I would say to you, I'm sure there's great local history books. I just can't think off the top of my head. And I know someone there, James Langton, probably will put up a book. But what I would do is go to the witness statements and just type in Athlone, because you will find accounts from volunteers. Now I know they're one-sided, but you will get information as to what was happening in Athlone and the surrounding area. And then the pension files, if you type in Athlone, God knows how many pensions you're going to get, but my God, they are the gift that keeps on giving, because you're not just getting the big names with the pensions, you're getting the ordinary rank and file, or the dependents of volunteers who died or were killed. They're absolutely amazing. So I checked there, and unfortunately the libraries aren't open. But if the libraries were open, or if you have a subscription, Irish newspapers online, the local newspapers are fantastic, because the richness of the stories that you get from them are amazing, and are telling the local side, the local story. They're fantastic, and it just proves that you cannot have the national story without telling the local story, and that's where the real history is at, and there's so much more to be discovered, but there probably is a book on that alone, and I just can't think of it.
Yeah, I'm sure there is. We could check it out and maybe put up one or two.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we'd go back to this at the end of the series anyway.
Yes. Yeah.
Let's see. Tommy Hegarty, when did Danbury die, and did he serve in the first Dáil?
Not in the first Dáil. He was a TD. He's the first to take one. I think he's one of the first to take a seat in the Dáil of anti-treaty. It was 1923 he went in, and it's a 69 that he dies. 69 or 70 when he dies. 1969 or 70 when he dies. Okay,
great. Mark O'Brien, first class talk as usual. Brilliant, Liz. Hope to see you soon for my podcast, In the Shadow of Croker, Walking Tours.
Hi, Sean.
Okay, Muriel McCauley says Danbury died December 1969, I think. So look, we've been on a long time, Liz.
Yeah.
We really need to leave it there, and to come back. Yeah, we'll be back, of course, next week with some more. If you want to finish up, perhaps with that. But just for anybody who wants it, we do have a series of books which we publish. So just give you a quick flash at them here, and if we can get them up.
Yeah, they're up, Michal.
Yeah, you see that? Okay. So we got some 6 books there. There will be more coming over the year as well, and they're all available at commandandtales.ie or in a few shops around the city, Dublin City as well. You'll get them in this. Hannah's and Rapmines in particular have the full range. Right, Liz, back to you.
Okay. So everyone, again, just like to say,